a pilgrimage to the boiler room. Happily, or to the HVAC system location, or to the cooling if you're in Texas, happily many of you obviously have made that pilgrimage. And I would guess some of you who've even prayed there. And moments of desperation, and for those who have oil and know what a bad idea it is. This is in fact what many boilers, this happens to be an old steam boiler in the boiler room in the bowels of a church. This happens to be in Cambridge. No, it's not Christ Church, where Julie grew up. But it's what they look like. And it's what it looks like when they haven't been taken care of, and what you tend to find a lot. Here's what we're going to do today that helps you think through all of this. When we were all growing up, we used to play 20 questions. You all remember that. We're getting nodded. Well, like everything else, that game has now suffered inflation, and it's 24 questions. But these are questions for environmental stewardship. They're in this, well, we'll going through them. But for example, heat, air conditioning, domestic hot water. Is your boiler or furnace 90% plus efficient? If you can answer yes, you are on the road to salvation. You are doing what environmental stewardship needs to be done. If you say no, or if you say I don't know, then you know where your journey needs to go. You have to find those things out, and you have to do something about it. The same with all the other questions in these 4 categories. And we will be going through each of the categories as we do this. But first, some very basic reasons to be thinking about this. Carbon footprint, you've heard the term, but let's just talk about it comparatively speaking. Countries, why are we worried about it, particularly in the United States? Because we're horrible. Because we are the cause for a lot of what is going wrong in caring for God's creation. And as a consequence of that, these sorts of things are happening, using the biblical phrase, unto the least of these. And it is indeed a faith issue. It is about creation. It's about what we just came from, and what the bishop talked about. And it's turning people into climate refugees, and it is creating a huge mess for our children, our grandchildren, and I hope it's a couple of more years before I have great-grandchildren. My oldest grandchild is only 20, but who knows. But that's what we're causing. That's our legacy, and that's not what we want. Now, how many of you have ever flown into Logan Airport in Boston? Okay, you will recognize it there for you. This is Boston aerial. There's Logan on the right. And here is the downtown Boston area. Here's Boston Harbor. Here's the Charles River. Here is that college you go to if you want to get Preparation H. There's the Back Bay area. And this is what it looks like now. And if we don't do anything particularly to change what's happening on climate change and global warming, that's what the Back Bay is going to look like. And for those of you who have ever been to Boston and have worshipped at the jewel of the diocesan crown, Trinity Copley Square, you will have to go there in a boat. And if you happen to want to drive along Storrow Drive, you will have to have a boat. It will be water. This is what's happening. This is what global warming is doing. And if we don't literally take responsibility for it, that's what we're leaving. All of us must lead to care for God's creation. And now the practical sort of stuff. Fundamental assumption, as we're talking about this in our houses of worship, okay, you got the building now, or buildings in many of the cases. Let's deal with the energy hog character of what we've got. Separately, or perhaps when you deal with some of this sort of thing, you will then also have the fundamental issues to deal with about, should we have this building? What are we going to do that's different with this building? Or where else are we going to go, much as some of the questions were raised yesterday. But for now, we're making the assumption you're dealing with what you got. And why are our buildings such energy hogs? Well, there's a lot of good reasons. You heard some 18th century buildings here. Some buildings still heated by wood stoves. We're old buildings, complicated buildings. We've got, particularly because they're old, but even some of the newer ones. And I was stunned to actually hear some buildings built in the 80s and 90s. But of course, we're talking about down here, new buildings from 1950. You know, I was in high school then. That's new. That was a lot of new buildings were built. That's the expansion of parish houses, the Christian Ed building, all of that sort of stuff. All that happened, and we saw yesterday from Kirk the dynamic that led to that sort of thing. We've got expanding demand for it, so we build buildings and do the stuff. But most of the case, even those ones are inefficient. We've got big sanctuaries. We've got unique architecture that is complicated to take care of. We have very strange use patterns. I didn't even want to ask you about how gets used why or when, but you all know that. It's not like school schedule. It's not like office building schedule. Nobody's like that at all. The budget struggle question has come up a lot, but here's the real reason why we're energy hogs. It's that wonderful sin word, sloth. We just don't want to deal with it. Just don't want to deal with it, and so things get really bad. But the fact of the matter is, every part of your building, sooner or later, is going to die. Sooner or later, is going to have problems. It will happen to you, and you don't want to have happen what happened in this particular church. Actually, I will name them because they have owned up to their sin and have changed. This is St. James in Porter Square, Cambridge. It was, there is the boiler, here on the left, for where that first picture came from. You can look at this and know the before and after, and you don't have to be an engineer to know that the after is the way you want things. Clean, simple, direct, new. Although everything on the left was once clean, simple, direct, and new in its time as well. But you need to get ahead of this. But here's what you do not want to have happen. One frozen February morning, 4 years after I was there and doing all of this, there was a funeral, 10 o'clock funeral. Dearly loved member of the congregation. At 8 o'clock, the boiler died. They still had to have the funeral. And the only question was how many people were going out feet first from that funeral. It was so cold. They were embarrassed, to say the least, particularly having had the guilty knowledge that this was at risk and they really did need to change it. I got a call the next day. What mechanical engineer should we hire to get this done so we can get it done so we're not frozen over next year? And so in the course of that summer, they were able to change everything. And we will come and I will show you in a little bit some of the changes. But basically, they dropped their utility use and cost by over half when they made that change. And this is true in all kinds of faith communities. These all happen to be in Massachusetts, in Boston area generally. But it's true on all of the other places that I've been and the kind of things you can do. Here's one of the newer sorts of buildings in the Diocese of Massachusetts, excuse me, the Diocese of Eastern Massachusetts. For those who want geographic, there's a type of building which we refer to as the Swiss Chalet. All of them got built in the 50s and 60s. And there it is, and they converted their new boiler, which was their original boiler, finally to a totally new, efficient, over 90% gas, huge drop. The Cathedral of St. Paul, my God, the diocese actually did something. They changed their light bulbs. It must have been the result of an Easter Vigil experience. But they dropped it 14%. Reduction in use, saved $12,000. If they'd done it the year before, they wouldn't have had to lay somebody off. Another reason why we want to be looking at this. Among the things about green grows two ways, one of which you put in your pocket. It's the money part that's a benefit. My mother always used to say, isn't it nice to do well by doing good? And that's what we get to here. St. Paul's Dedham, big drop when they changed things over. Boston Synagogue, and for those of you who use a lot of air conditioning, I keep this in, 1974 building. Here you can see on their roof their old air conditioning system before they changed over to a mini-split, contemporary, high efficiency. They used to have heating by steam that was imported from the boiler plants of the electric company. got rid of that entirely. Since I've made this slide, actually, they've got rid of steam altogether. Their electric use is down by about 40%. They have air conditioning, as every synagogue, because of their high holy days being September. You need to have air conditioning. Huge change there. St. Andrew's Wellesley, one of those sorts of Episcopal churches that just kept growing like Topsy, and another thing got stuck on, and another thing, and then over here. At least they can get between every building. But huge sort of thing. Just putting in new windows, 13% reduction. They finally changed from steam to hot water. Took them 8 years to figure this out. One of the prompts was they were starting to pay $20,000 to $30,000. So over 3 years, they did it for 3 years in that range, because they had leaky steam pipes. Why? Okay, New Yorkers know about leaky steam pipes.
Actually, I misspoke. We do have forced air. It's not steam.
Right, but if you live in New York, New York's heavily steam, and you know about leaky steam pipes. Steam pipes, particularly those that go horizontally, get steam, all the gunk stuck in them, and then it comes down, and anything that's horizontal, it starts filling up. All of the carbon, everything else that's in it. And finally, they start rusting from inside out, and then they start exploding when they try to push the steam through, and it's horrible. $20,000 to $30,000. They finally said, why are we spending this kind of money? Let's change it. Yes, let's change it. So for about $600,000 for this whole thing, they put in new boilers, new distribution, and they went from 3 heating zones to 34. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But they reduced carbon footprint 65%, the heating part 54%, huge drop. Not only were they not spending $20,000 to $30,000 to fix something that was dead anyhow, now they're putting it into good, they reduced the cost of their operation by $20,000 a year for all of their heating costs. Right there, they're paying that off in about 12, 13 years, the whole thing, on something that they had to replace anyhow. The pipes are gone, you got to do it anyhow. It's like when your shingles go and the leaks start coming in, you got to do that same way with all your heating. Charles Street AME in Roxbury, another example of where you can do and we'll get to this, the low-hanging fruit, what you can do easily yourself, thermal fix-ups, dealing with insulation and all kinds of other stuff. Heating, ventilating, air conditioning. The nice thing about engineering terms is that they're not really obscure, unlike doing biblical exegesis. So pretty much, you know, HVAC, heating, ventilating, air conditioning, that's what it means. A pipe is a pipe. A valve is a valve. So happily, things will end up like that, unlike how, which we made up. Okay, the beginning of the questions, behavior. Basically, things that we have control over by our choice as opposed to an external technology. First thing you need to know, and I bet you everybody can pretty quickly tell me a whole lot about how much they're paying for utilities. I don't care, because the cost of utilities is an externality. It's set by somebody else. The cost of a gallon of oil, of a therm of gas, of a kilowatt hour of electricity is set by somebody else. But what you get to deal with is what you're using. How many kilowatt hours? How many therms? How many gallons? How much volume of water and sewer? That you can deal with, because those are behavioral things. Those are choice things. And the things that you want to look at are not so much, what am I paying for, let's say, heat, but how is that related to degree days? If I'm using oil for heat, I want to know whether this year the amount of gallons I've used is proportionately in line with or better than the changes of heating degree days. Heating degree days measure how cold it is outside, therefore how much you got to heat it up. So here we have somebody, the degree days in 2008 were about the same as 2007, but their gallons, the amount of gallons they used were only 82%. They dropped by 18%. Somebody was doing something right. Same way here, heating degree days up by 25%, still only 82%, and down again here. Somebody's doing something right there, even though they are using a particularly noxious type of fuel, oil, but at least they're doing something right, and that's what you can pay attention to. There will also often be a relationship in cost, but as you all know, those of you who use oil, oil is volatile in its pricing, unlike regulated commodities, electricity and gas, which aren't. So you need to follow both of those. And here's how you can do it. It's on your flash drives. You can also download it from Mass Interfaith Power and Light if you'll get that. And that is, there's a simple Excel form that we have that sums up to the one there that gives you for every type of utility. So it's gas, electric, oil, propane if you happen to use that, your water and sewer, and lets you track month to month what's going on. Here's your therms. Here's the change from the prior year. Here's the degree day. So again, therms are down, degree days are up. But here we go, degree days are down and therms are up 16%. You start saying, what's going on? And what's going on here? 131% higher when the degree days were only 87%. What was going on? What was going on? And this lets you monitor the use. At All Saints a couple of years ago, because I track on this every month, the electricity came in for April, and it was about 40% higher than the prior year. You pretty much assume that, okay, every year you're doing basically the same stuff, and so you should be having roughly the same amount of use of whatever, adjusting for degree days. But since we don't have air conditioning, it's even more likely the same, because it's just the lights turning on and that sort of thing. So I went, there's a technical term that I won't say because it's all four-letter words, but went into the office and said, Peggy, how come this is going on? Was something unusual going on last month? She said, oh, Tom, you know, we had those photographers in taking pictures for the church directory. And they have all of those bright lights, and they were in 4 Saturdays all day, so 8 or 9 hours of the bright lights going as we all came in and smiled for those ugly photos that are always in directories. So, okay, I said, but that can't be that much. She said, oh yes, and then the Jewish congregation that just has a townhouse across the street wanted to have this big wedding celebration, whatever, and they needed to do 2 rehearsals for it, so they were in here. So how long was that going? Well, they started at 10 and didn't finish till 6 every day. So they were there 3 times for 8 hours of our sanctuary. This is before we changed to LED lights. We'll get to that in a minute. And so we had 120 floodlights all on, because they turned it all on, so the lights were on constantly, 90 watts each. You do the math. For 8 hours, okay, now I understand why our electricity went up. And then I said, and did we charge them for all of this? And of course not, because who knew? It's just electricity. But no, it's not. Yeah.
Well, one thing that's covering your
Right.
expenses.
Yeah. Absolutely important thing to do. What's used when, and attribute the amount of space, and then you have an understanding. And I will tell you, when you track that out, I mean, and here's what I know from my own church and from your experience. You're so used to things happening, you don't know what's happening. It's just the routines are so routine, you don't know. At least when you walk in this afternoon, you'll get to say, why is this going like this? And they'll say, geez, you know, I never thought about that before. But we're all used to that. When church insurance came one time, and particularly the inspector, they'll probably come to yours, every 2 or 3 years. I'm walking him around. He said, where's the fire extinguishers? And I did one of those. Well, I put them up. I'm not sure where they are, but I know they're somewhere. We'll see them while we're going around. He said, that's not good enough. If you don't know where they are, nobody else knows where they are, we got to know. And of course, there's nothing quite like embarrassment to make you do something. And so we now have signs and everything else. But this is what we need to know, these things. And you need these kind of somebody from the outside looking, and you need to keep track of things so that you've got this external. We did a survey in the Diocese of Massachusetts, the eastern part of Massachusetts. 61 of the 180 actually gave us the information, which is pretty good on survey sort of stuff. And here's the range of costs. But just those 61 spending $1.5 million on utilities. It ain't like this is trivial. Look at your own budget, see what proportion it is, and see whether you could get down into that 2 or more percent. Okay, here's another question, basic question. Is your heating or cooling system serviced regularly? Let me ask it even differently. I need a show of hands. How many have a service contract for either for the primary plant, either heating or cooling? Okay, we're somewhere around half. How many of you have a regular personal physician? Show of hands. Okay. It's really like this. Not having a maintenance contractor is like not having a doctor. You need somebody who comes and takes care of stuff, who actually understands it, who has that fresh eyes, whose job it is to make sure it's being taken care of. Here's some basic things you need to know, but ask them this afternoon when you go. Do they have, who's their contractor? And periodically, you want to put that contract out to bid. And here's a major reason for that. Aside from keeping your contractor on his or her toes, one of the things when you have 3 or 4 people come in and offer you, okay, for the regular service contract, I will charge you X amount a year, I will come twice a year, I'll make sure it goes. But for them to say that and say that's going to work, they're also going to say, and by the way, what I'm also going to have to do to make sure it keeps going is I have to do these 2 pumps and this new control and all of that. They will basically do an evaluation of your system when they quote you the price to take care of it. Let me ask about, so now it's about water. Most of it goes down the drain, but how much of it do we really need? When you're washing your hands, when you're brushing your teeth, when you're shaving, whatever, most of the time you're looking at it. And most of the time at the church, it's just washing your hands. So what do we need to do on water and so forth? Okay, first thing is change to 0.5 gallon per minute faucet aerators. That costs you, if you buy them in 6 or more, about $2 each. It will be, that drops from 2.2 to 0.5, that's nearly 80% drop. And I will tell you, since my wife put up with this and says it's okay, anybody will. So, and it does save a lot of what's going down, plenty of water going in. Dual flush toilets. We've got it, particularly if you've got daycares at your houses of worship. The daycare at All Saints, the lady's really quite wonderful. I went and talked about this. I said, we really want to change to 0.5, or to the dual flush. And she said, oh yes, these children pee and poop all the time. We need to do something about that. When we changed over at All Saints and all of this, we dropped our overall water use by 25%. You probably don't want to change the faucet in the kitchen because that tends to fill up basically pots and pans and so forth. You could drop that to a 1.5 and you'd be all right. Now the other thing is does anybody have showers in their church? Pretty much not. Occasionally there's a church that has a shelter that they will have showers and so forth. There's a gym where there was a room, but generally not. But I say this because this is one of those things that you can then, as you do all of these things, you tell everybody in the parish about it. You say you can do this at home, and the biggest one you can do at home is shower heads. Now, changing from a 2.5 to 1.5 is going to save you 40%. But the biggest savings, and this we've worked out with the Diocesan Youth Council, because I had a meeting with them and said, okay, what is it that you guys do that is the biggest significant impact on the environment? They couldn't think for a while, and then I said, okay, how many of you take showers that last less than 30 minutes? And there were no hands raised. Teenagers, I don't know what they do in there, because they're always alone, but, and you know, if it were boys and it were cold showers, all right, but 30, 45 minutes. Our granddaughter lives with us, came to live with us when she was 14, so I'm really painfully aware of this. Long showers. And so we created this little sheet. You put in the yellow, okay, how long does your shower take? Here's a 10-minute typical shower. And then you fill in what kind of heating is it, gas, oil, or electricity to generate your domestic hot water. And it calculates out how much for a single shower in cost and carbon footprint, and then how much that shower will cost for a year. So if you've got your typical oil-fired hot water tank, a 10-minute shower costs $170 a year if you're paying a mere $3.89 a gallon for oil. When you start adding all that up, and you say, oh my heavens. And if you've got that and you're a 30-minute teenage shower, you're over $500 a year for that kid to shower. And they start, $500, oddly enough, actually means something to teenagers these days. $100, maybe not.
Cost versus.
Motion detector lights, absolutely, and then we'll get to bulbs. On demand, we'll get to that also. Absolutely efficient, and I've got some calculations on that. So, but let's now go to just shifting off behavior and into buildings per se. Okay, what am I looking at here? Floor plan, and what's it a floor plan of? Okay, what's this space here? Sanctuary, it's a sanctuary. What are these spaces here? Offices. What are these spaces here? Classrooms. And what are these here? Parish hall, meeting rooms, where you have the coffee or whatever after. Okay. This is just one floor. It could be just the entirety of a church building. In this particular case, it had a basement, had a second floor, and it had a gym on the third floor over this side. How many thermostats do you think this church has? It happens to be in Brooklyn. However, don't get too worried. It's not in the Diocese of New York. It's a Baptist church.
It's in the Diocese of Long Island, first of all. Even if it's an Episcopal church, it's not in the Diocese of New York.
In Brooklyn?
No, Brooklyn is in Long Island.
Staten Island, okay, all right. But it's Baptist, so you can breathe a sigh of relief. But and where is that thermostat? Sanctuary, right up here. So if somebody comes into the office, they have to go in there and heat up the sanctuary to get the office warm, which means they open the windows in the office. And to get the gymnasium warm, you got to turn on the sanctuary. Do you think this is efficient? Oh no. So you've got to match what you heat, what are the spaces that are occupied, and get them to match up, so that and you maximize the number of zones to match your use patterns. I mean, here's what I know. Having gone through this at All Saints, we have a high-quality musical program. We have an organ that's $1.2 million in value. Love it to death. And so the music director said, I want a constant temperature. And I said, fine, I'll calculate what that's going to cost. It was about $3,300 a year. And I said, Don, you can take it out of your budget. He reconsidered whether he really needed it. He consulted with the organ folks. And what he concluded was if basically it held the calibration, and if he tuned it before Christmas and before Easter, it'd be fine. And I also said to him, and by the way, how did Johann Sebastian Bach deal with this in Leipzig, where we don't have thermostats and we didn't have constant temperature? Come on, Don. And so, yes, and I've checked with the same organ folks and so forth. It's probably, I mean, and you already know, you're not keeping it constant year-round, so. I would say, I mean, what we do is drop the sanctuary down to about 54. And partly, and then you also get the question of, okay, what are the walls? How cold can you get? How long is it going to come up? We'll get to that in a thermostat in a while, but we're one of those pile of holy stone places that doesn't have any insulation in the walls, and it's huge and high and everything else, and so 54 works. You may, depending on the kind of insulation, you may be able to go otherwise, or set at 54 and you don't have it to come on a lot. But here's, I mean, that's not All Saints. That happens, that's a congregational church actually in Cambridge. Big, high sanctuaries, figuring out the zones, heat only what you need. And in this case, by the way, I don't know if you have this happening in your church, There's the organ. The organist had turned on the heat every time he came in to practice. The whole place has to warm up. People need to be warm, not the whole place. So in that case, I encourage them, as we have at All Saints, get a little space heater at the organ so the organist, music director is warm. You'll do this sort of thing 5 to 30%. Okay, take a good look at this. We've just been talking about this, and to keep the doors closed. What is wrong with this picture? Well, it's open, but there's something worse than that. This is a zone. Lights are on and nobody's there. That's bad. No, no, no. I got a door open. The number of churches I go into where the door is open, and particularly the door into the sanctuary, letting all that cold air come into the rest where you're trying to heat up. Might as well leave the door outside open. Keep the doors closed. All right. By the way, this is where I got the term the pilgrimage. That's how I had to get to the boiler room at that Baptist church in Brooklyn. Getting the cobwebs out of the way as I went. Nobody had been to the boiler room. And God knows how long. Literally, God knew how long, because nobody at the church knew. They didn't have a maintenance contract. They didn't have anything. All right, what's wrong with this picture? No insulation. What makes it even worse, there's been no insulation there since it was built 20 years ago. It's over the office, the most used space in that church. Nobody had ever gone up and looked. Obviously, nobody had done a punch list when they built. So you need that. There's that. And then here's kind of your classic undercroft. I'd call it a crawl space, but we're Episcopalian, so we have to give it that fancy name. Of our old churches with wood structures, where you can, in this case, you can insulate it, but you can also put in-floor radiation, hot water radiation right up and under, which means the whole floor, all of the space is warm right where people are. Nice thing about in-floor radiation is it slowly goes up, and in 2 or 3 hours, it only gets to about 7 feet. You don't have to heat the ceiling where the angels are, just where the people are. So you do that and it gets warm, and you can do that as a retrofit, make it work really well. And a lot of our old buildings have got these really weird sorts of systems. In this case, this was by the turn of the century, the last one, so it's in 1903. Somebody had been smart enough and put in the lower level, put a ductwork that they could open in the summer, so it was cool down in the basement, let cool air move up, this is in Boston, into the meeting room that was over top. Great idea, but that property chairman has been dead for 90 years, and nobody knew about it. So I go in there, look at this, and said, how come this thing is here? Nobody knew. Another reason you have somebody from outside. I poke around, figure out, see where it's going. They'd also build over it up top, and everybody who was on that stage area and in that area said, you know, it's always cold here in the winter. No kidding. This thing was open, and the cold air was coming up from the downstairs. So not useful, particularly since it was covered over. So the idea is, okay, let's just fill it up, insulate it, and shut it off. Stop making it work. That's why you get the outside eyes coming in, because you have all kinds of, on our old church buildings, Emmanuel has got, I'm sure, all kinds of weird stuff going on. And on all of those, the 1700s buildings that you got, probably less so because they weren't as elaborate engineering at the time. Late 19th century, you started getting the engineers saying, oh, we're really going to make this neat. So you've got to fix that. Do you have high efficiency windows? Some of you talked about stained glass, which are not high efficiency, although there is a way in which you can put a thermal break on the inside. But all the other sorts of windows, are they thermopane? And again, it's something you do at home. If you do have stained glass windows, do not put exterior storms on that are tight. If you're going to put those on, the main reason for that is to control vandalism and be sure they're vented. Because if you get it tight, what happens is, let me tell you, they're never that tight. And so moisture gets in, and where does it adhere to? All of the leading on the stained glass. And then you get expansion, contraction, and then your stained glass starts pushing out, and then you've got a $50,000 stained glass repair issue. But here's what you can do. particularly for other sorts of windows, and that is what I call interior storms. A lot of us here in this room are old enough that back in the 50s when we used to have, every spring you'd take down the storm windows, put up the screens, and then in the fall you'd reverse it. Same sort of thing here. That's why I call them interior storm windows. You can put them on the inside. It's plexiglass. You can have a very lightweight, they're fairly lightweight, a lightweight frame, and then use a little rubber gasketing on the inside and just attach it. They can go in all kinds of rooms. This happens to be the fancy social room called the Guild Room at All Saints, which has cast stone window surrounds, leaded and so forth. We put them in there. Actually, I will have to admit to how we did this. The property committee didn't tell anybody. We just did it one Saturday at a work day, matched it all up and so forth, because there are a lot of issues I'm sure you have in your churches. If you ask for something ahead of time, it takes forever to decide if you ever decide. If you do something, you can always beg forgiveness, particularly if it works. So we just went ahead and did it. That February, on a cold day, I got one of those, Tom, come over here, during the coffee hour. Oh my God, I'm going to catch it, I thought. Did you do something different in here this year? Well, why do you ask? Well, because it's warmer. Yes, God. And so I said, well, come here, let me show you. Walked over. I never noticed. Yeah. You can put stuff in, it works, they fit, even in fancy old buildings, and we have a historic designation in our building, so we had to deal with it. You can do that. The other thing to note here, this young man is now an ordained Episcopal priest. If you start them out right, they know what to do. Okay, artificial light. Is there appropriate light levels in what you're doing? And so use your natural lighting. This is a relatively low, it's a southern church in North Carolina, but here's a bunch of lights, still hard to reach, and a bunch of the old piles of stone. What did the bishop say this morning, 100 feet high or whatever? I mean, I know All Saints is 65 feet high up. Hard to get to. So one of the things is, do you have efficient bulbs? Who can tell me what's on the right? LED. And also what's different about this LED? See that little thing on the top? You can twirl it so you get a 10, 12, or 16 watt, depending on the intensity you need. We changed to the LEDs in All Saints, and the overall electricity, just because of the sanctuary, the overall electricity dropped by 15%. That's how much you're using in the sanctuary. And all of our sanctuaries tend to have a lot of lighting in it. So don't let the electric company auditor say, oh, you don't use it enough to make a difference. If they want data, I can provide the data. We've now got the NSTAR coming up with this. But here's the drop. The other thing, you saw that high ceiling, and you know high ceilings in your churches? A lot of the cost of dealing with light bulbs is not the cost of the bulb, it's what it takes to get there. And that little church with 20 bulbs to replace got a quote from an electrician of $1,000 to replace their bulbs. Because it was $200, so what they did was rent the lift for $200, bought the bulbs, put them in themselves, total cost around $450, put in LEDs, they'll all be dead before they ever have to replace them again. Email me, I'll send you all, because we got some lighting stuff out, but there's all kinds of bulbs, and they're dimmable. Big deal. What these are is the T12s. You can drop to now the T8s with the electronic ballast, or T5s and 6s, and they're about to come out with LEDs in these 2x4s and 2x2s as well. Are your appliances ENERGY STAR rated? And particularly refrigerators, but anyhow, key thing to know here, go to ENERGY STAR. They update every month a very detailed product rating that tell you everything about 38 different kinds of equipment. Just because it says ENERGY STAR in your refrigerator doesn't mean it's the best. You can go and find out, see the price, see its efficiency. It's absolutely worth doing. And because churches tend to be the kind who feel like they should accept donations, don't. Andover Newton Theological Seminary had this, they'd accepted it, nobody knew what was open. I opened the door, one bottle of water in, it was costing $500 a year to run this thing. Look a gift horse in the mouth. Other simple electric things, LEDs. Now let's get to the heating stuff. And we've got about 5 minutes, so we're really going to move fast through this, but it's efficient, and you can look through boilers and furnaces just to make sure we understand the difference. Boilers deal with water, furnaces deal with air. And then if you're in the South, you know about fan coil units and things of that sort. But fundamental thing, this is the minimum allowed. No, you want to get as high as you can. Hydronic, that is hot water boilers, can now get to 95%. Gas-fired furnaces can get to 95% efficiency, which means they use that amount of fuel to get whatever heat you want. That's why it works so well. You asked about on-demand heaters, particularly for churches, where the pattern of demand is highly variable, and mainly just for sinks. It really works because an on-demand generates hot water only when somebody asks for it. Compare that with the 40-gallon tank that I used to have, in my basement. Lots of people do. 65% efficient, heats 24/7 to a temperature. This is 95% efficient, heats only when asked for. When we put this into All Saints, you'll save at least 30%. We dropped our cost by 43%. Part of that had to do with the distance that it took, because it used to be in the boiler room. This is now over the sink in the kitchen, which is right underneath the bathroom on the first floor and underneath the bathroom on the second floor. So the distance we're having to run the hot water to get there is also dropped. We're saving both ways.
This is the standard in Great Britain.
Oh yeah. In Great Britain, in Japan, all over the place. This is there. Depending on what you're replacing your normal tank, I'll quote you Boston prices, $850. Putting this in will cost you depending on the volume of water you need, and you'll figure that out, somewhere between $1,500 and $2,500. This will last you 20 years, will save you huge amounts. Your tank will go, if it's a 5-year warranty, it'll go 5 years and 1 day. Air conditioning, South, Maryland, other places, here's your standard. It's not the 95% thing, it's the SEER at 13 or higher, and you really want that. This is when you're replacing your outdoor condenser. And similarly, you can look on EPA for through window air conditioners to see what kind of efficiency you're getting there. Programmable thermostats. Do you have them? Good. Are they smart?
Are the people using them smart? We have people using them.
There is that problem too, but there's a kind called SMART, or adaptive recovery. What that kind does is recognize how long it takes to get cool or warm in the space. So if you went to sanctuary, it's winter, if you went to sanctuary at 68 degrees at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, and it knows it took 45 minutes to get that warm the last time, it'll bring it on at 7:15. You don't have to guess. Now, the other thing about thermostats, if you've also got spaces that are used by other folks, 12-step groups and so forth, because I'll tell you this story because we had this problem, put that in there, says, fine. Whoever comes in an hour early to start the coffee, feels cold, turns it up. I went ballistic. So we put the lock thing over it. They broke the lock. So I got another one, painted it black, put a little manual thermostat on the front connected to nothing. They came in, happily turned it up. By the time everybody was there, they were warm. They had done their part, and we were fine. It takes a little creativity to be gracious. Okay. Insulating of ducts and pipe, and we talked about walls and ceilings already. So let's talk about our levels of action so we can go back over this. Low-hanging fruit, routine manageable dollars, and I trust everybody has in their budget a line for the property that says, you know, when I need to get a $200 thing or a $400 thing or an $800 thing, there's money there in your annual operating budget. And then there, you got to do it even if it's big dollars. This is where you absolutely need a 20-year plan or more, but at least 20 years that says, okay, looking out at stuff for the next 20 years, this is when we need to Let me look at this. Okay, we got a carpet down here. It's kind of scuffed. It probably went in about 3 years ago. It's got about another 4 years to go. So in year 4, I need to have money for carpets. The wall here is pretty good, and anyhow, it's on my operating budget, so I'm not going to put it in my capital. But these windows are starting to fog and looking pretty terrible, and they were here from the beginning, so maybe it's time to change them. And so I'm going to consult with the powers that be and say, okay, in 3 years, I want to change out the windows because we're doing some other stuff, and so that's capital. So that's the big stuff, got to do it. Low-hanging fruit are the things we've talked about. Faucet aerators, LED light bulbs. I'm calling that low-hanging fruit because of how long they last and how much it costs if you have to keep going and putting them back, and then the smart adaptive recovery thermostats. Routine manageable stuff, dual flush toilets. You can change over with a $20 converter kit. Those worked, and we in fact did it for a while for the daycare. And even the daycare kids knew how to push the button, but we then eventually changed over $200 for a toilet. American Standard, very good $200 dual flush toilet. The on-demand domestic hot water, we just talked about the cost on that. The high efficiency refrigerators. And the other thing, when you do all of this, and you do it in the church, put signs up about what's going on. You're going to have to do that in a dual flush anyhow so people understand. But put it up, say what you're saving, and say do it at home. And then, of course, you can say, and give us a tithe of all your savings. Or more. But it is why we're all leading. It's why we need to do this, and we can do it. Now for the big things. As I said, have this 20-year capital needs plan. You've got to have the piggy bank, and you've got to be filling it every year. You can't always go to the well for a capital campaign, particularly if what you need in a given year is $20,000–$25,000. That's more than your operating, typical church, operating budget. Not enough to get it together for a capital campaign. What are you going to do if you need to do a $25,000 something? You're coming back to the bigger question, which this whole thing is about, and that is what, and one guy asked yesterday about, can I get money to deal with this, this bishop wants me and I'm there for 8 hours or whoever. It was in Buffalo, that's all I remember. The church is not the building. The church is the people and what we're called to do, and you figure it out from that, and everything else will be okay. But if all you're trying to do is keep the damn building going, you ought to be damn well stuck in the bottom of it, down there in the Undercroft, where nobody will ever find you.